Hey guys, today I thought I would share my review of Perdita Finn's new book, Take Back the Magic, Bring Back the Magic. I keep wanting to say that it's Bring Back the Magic, but it is Take It Back, full power. Generally, I quite liked the book. I always enjoy hearing other people's stories and journeys of like their spiritual paths, basically. I love hearing about many different people's healing journeys, physical healing journeys, and also their spiritual, emotional, psychological healing journeys. And I like to learn about those stories because that's work that I'm interested in doing and interested in helping other people. So I like to dabble in all kinds of different, I like to intake from all kinds of different places for those storylines. For example, one book that's coming to mind that I think I should mention is Brandon Bay's book, The Journey. And it's a book about her sharing her healing journey of, she had tumors that were the size of like a basketball in her womb that she was able to heal and kind of dissolve, I guess, internally without surgery. So she did do a lot of physical changes like juicing and green juicing, and then energetic work, but eventually she had these meditations where she was processing different things in her soul that to me remind me a little bit about the QHHT work that I do. And she would have like imagine a fire with people from her life and just like pull out different emotional layers. Anyway, it's a great book. She then created a whole program from it, but I really love the book for inspiration about healing. She's an NLPer as well, neuro-linguistic programming. Okay, so in general, how did I feel about the book? I'm like not 50-50. I would say I loved it 70%. I'm giving it like 3.5 stars out of 5, 4 stars maybe. I listened to it on Audible and I found it a little bit too theatrical. I loved that it was the author herself who was reading. I think that's really fun. But sometimes it was too much, a little bit too much. And first, I think it's amazing that she wrote this book at all. I guess I'm like considering maybe writing a book or small ebooks to start, or, telling different stories, my story. And it's something that I'm taking in as I'm reading and listening to these books. Like, wow, there's really a human behind this who had to create something from nothing and created this book from nothing. So I'm in this place right now where I just think anyone who puts out a decent book and like one that sells is pretty cool. So I think that's cool. She has a great choice for words. So it's poetic and, like I said, a little bit theatrical in the way that it's read, and also perhaps in the way that it's written, in the sense that I find the drama of her life is like accentuated a little bit. Like there's kind of like an extra magnitude and theater to the drama of her life. And as someone who kind of comes from the traditions of yoga and even, the Buddhist traditions of like non-attachment, I think I would have liked to see more matter-of-factness about it. I don't know. I mean, some of the stories were pretty intense and emotional, but I found like they could have been told with a bit more groundedness. I think that's what I was searching. I think that the book, to me, didn't feel super grounded. It felt a little bit out there without a place to land on, even spiritually. So also throughout the book, I can't remember what the subtitle of the book title is. It's Take Back the Magic, and something about connecting with the dead for, I don't know, for life. Connecting with the dead for life. That's an interesting title. No, it's not that. Something along those lines. And the book harps and harps and harps and harps on the dead and connecting with the dead, but then also goes on these strange tangents and then tries to bring everything back to the dead. The dead are everywhere. Everything is made from the dead. Their souls are everywhere. They're all listening. They're everywhere. We can pray to them. We can ask for help. And we should. And it's like everything is the dead. It's this big thing. I think for her, it's like a big illumination or enlightenment that she's having in her personal life. And that has really helped her. And I love seeing her journey in connecting with the dead and in understanding what it all means. For me, I felt like it was a little bit too much. And I found that there's missing an aspect of like the divine that's behind it all, even behind the dead. I guess I'm alluding to God or source, divine mother, father is what I sometimes refer to it as, great mystery. There wasn't much mention of that. And at one point she even points out, she's like throwing out monotheism and pointing out the problems with monotheism, how it has done away with polytheism and how we are no longer able to pray and honor our ancestors properly because religions like Judaism and Christianity and maybe even Islam have cut that part away from us. And I would agree to a certain extent, but it seems that in her book she has kind of done away with the oneness aspect or the divine at all. There isn't much talk about God. It's all about connecting with the dead. And that, like, yeah, to me it felt like it was like very much in this bubble when there could have been more spaciousness and more connection to the divine or to greater love, although the book was very full of love. Throughout the book, she tells the story of her father and kind of her parents, and she talks about her childhood, how difficult he was growing up, and basically he left her with this like strange rock that was like a horrible, hideous thing, like it wrapped around with metal. I love the way she describes it, very poetic. You can really feel the energy emanating from this object that she was given by her father, and he said like that her and her siblings were not to have anything else from his inheritance. She was only receiving that rock. And then the story kind of unfolds. By the way, I'm probably going to be giving away some pieces of information, like spoilers in this talk. I would say this review is more for people who have already read the book and are curious to hear someone else's thoughts and feelings about it, or have heard about the book and don't really want to read it and want to get a sense of what it's about, or you don't mind having something spoiled before getting into the book. So we follow her relationship with her father. She's writing letters to him and connecting to him from when he's in the other world, when he has died. One thing I find interesting about books like this and writing about your family and your childhood is how it seems that it's only something you can do when those people have died. I don't know. What do you think? Can you write about your parents and about your childhood in a very like real and honest way if they're alive? It's something that I have always thought about and played with. And she's talking about how when people pass to the other side, they're basically healed and they become much more clear, much more loving, and able to help and support us and love us in ways that they couldn't when they had their sheath of personality in this lifetime. And it's something that I have been sitting with myself because, you know, as everybody else, I work through things with my living parents. And my father, we're not speaking right now for 2 years. And I feel like I can talk to his soul now. I can be having those conversations with that part of him now, you know? I had an interesting QHHT session with someone whose father was difficult while he was alive, was an alcoholic and abusive and narcissistic. And we asked questions about him when we were in the part about the higher self. And we felt his energy come in. I felt his energy come in. I was almost brought to tears. And the message through her higher self was that he's there to help. He's there to help, the children that she's going to have, and he's there. And it was this huge feeling of love that filled up the whole room. And I go to thinking that part of that person is still in that person while they're alive, while they're incarnated. And so I think a lot of the work is, on my part, is feeling that love, even though there's no relationship, and even though superficially there's a lot of words and stuff and fluff and drama. Can I feel into that part while the person is alive? And then speaking about my mother, if I were to ever write a book, could I write it being real and so deeply loving that she would be able to read it, and it would be loving and honest, and I would be able to send my message across to the people who are reading, and that even if it's my mother reading, she would also feel love. Of course, you never can control how someone's going to take something in, but it's something that I sit with. Yeah. I would love to hear what you think about that. Can some of these more honest stories about our childhood be written while people are alive? There are a few quotes that I've written down that I want to share from the book. Some of them I liked, and others that kind of stirred things up for me that I didn't like so much. One is that she said about her father that he left everything behind regarding religion, including all the comforting parts of prayer and everything else, but he still believed in hell, held on to this idea of hell. I thought that was very interesting. She talks about being worried that she was going to go crazy like her grandmother. So her grandmother was kind of depressed and bipolar and, had these great big mood swings. And so her own mother always tried to do everything to not go into any psychic realms or, look into dreams or emotions too much. And as a granddaughter, she had picked up on those stories and was also very worried about going crazy. And in my family, I have a bit of a similar thing where on my dad's side, there's a woman who in her lifetime was kind of different than other people in the family. She didn't get married, except in her 70s, she did get married. She didn't have children, and she worked as a therapist. And she told me that she had, premonitory dreams, experiences of levitation. And I could feel like so much love emanating from this person. And at one point in this journey, she had like a psychotic break. What I think happened is that she was overcome with such a high level of energy that she didn't know how to ground it, and she didn't have proper mentorship and leadership, spiritual mentorship and leadership. And she ended up in a mental health institution and then on psychiatric drugs for the rest of her life to maintain her emotions, to maintain them stable. And of course, the drugs turned off any kind of psychic, spiritual side of her that she had. And so growing up, there was this underlying thing about this aunt and her craziness. And one of my greatest fears as a young adult was about going crazy. I was so afraid to go crazy. And I was actually very caught up in so much anxiety, and went down into a great deep depression, and I was having these like visions and thoughts and meditative experiences, and I was worried about going crazy. still. And eventually I realized that I had to embrace this kind of spiritual, more psychic aspect of myself and not be afraid of it. And I think there's the one saying, like, those who think they're not crazy are the crazy ones. And I just accepted it. And I'm very grateful for that whole experience, actually, because it allowed me to overcome this fear of being crazy. And so anyway, I love that, because I think that fear of being a crazy woman actually comes from many centuries of trauma where humans were punished, and the church came after people who were doing anything other than what the church thought was okay, basically. And so if you were praying to the dead, or if you were having visions, or if you were having certain dreams, then you were labeled as, you know, playing with the devil or dark magic, and you were crazy. And so in maybe 300-400 years ago, people would be burned or sent to prison or executed for something like that. And I think in the past 100 years, it has been, you're crazy and you're abnormal and we need to drug you. And of course, I think we need to be like functioning. Well, we don't have to be, but it's helpful for everyone, for ourselves and our families, if we are functioning beings through these kind of experiences. And I think it's possible. And I think with more leadership and the proper support, we can be growing spiritually and having these different experiences and be functional. Yes. So she mentions this cool experience in the south of France where she was traveling with a girlfriend in her early 20s, and she asked her friend to go up this mountain to like this special kind of new village that was being built on old buildings. She had heard it was a cool community, and she thought that they should go visit. But when she got there, she was feeling these feelings of panic and started to freak out, and told her friend, "I have to leave. I have to get out of here." And her friend said, "You're crazy," basically. You told me to come up here to this place, and now you want to leave? Like, had planned to be here for a few days. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying. There's a cute guy, and you can do what you need to do. And she ended up basically like just leaving that moment, just running down the hill, and she had to get out of there, had to take a train on, get back to, she was living in London at the time. And on the train, she met a man who was a writer and researcher, and he kind of said, like, "Have you heard about the Cathars?" And he kind of asked this thing, was talking to her a little bit, and she had never heard about these people, wrote it down in her journal, and years later found the same man on the face of him on the back of a book that he had written. And I actually found that book. So this is a little bit of a tangent about Holy Blood, Holy Grail that this man, Henry Lincoln, wrote. I bought it off of Amazon. It's from 1982. And it's a really cool read. It's basically the historical research that supports the story of the Da Vinci Code. And one thing I will say, it's a little bit of a tangent, but something that has been important for me. Oh, there is a baby here. Hi, baby. Is that the Cathars were, they were a Christian people. Okay, I'm back. A few days later, actually, the baby woke up, and then I had to tend to things in the house and with the children. He's actually sleeping in this room with me right now as I try to finish this little review. So speaking about the Cathars, I picked up that book, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, written in 1982 by a bunch of different authors, and it's like the historical facts that prove the story behind the Da Vinci Code, which is basically this idea that there is a living bloodline of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. And I have been diving into like Magdalenic teachings for about 2 or 3 years, possibly, through different like channelings. And also there's a really interesting book by Cynthia Bourgeot about, she kind of interprets passages in the Bible about Mary Magdalene, and also in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in some of the Gospels. They're old Gospels, but that were found as of 1947 and forward in time. And so I've been doing research about this, and I have not really yet come across male or men writing about this topic, and not like historical fact as well. So these men actually went and found like different parchment papers and contracts and yeah, like actually written evidence that proves about these secret societies who are hiding a secret. And then the authors kind of like take us on this journey and say that it's about the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is the fact that they're living descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene. Anyway, so I find that very interesting. I love the stories of the Cathars. They were living in like the south of France, and they all got massacred by the Roman Catholic Church, who was trying to eliminate anyone really thinking differently from them. And two things that, like, of their ideologies that were very different were that they didn't believe that Jesus died on the cross necessarily. They didn't believe in like the death and resurrection story as it stood in the Roman Catholic version. And they believed in the equality of men and women, and that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were an actual couple. And they believed in reincarnation as well. So all of those things like really shift Christianity, I think. And I was going back to this idea of people thinking that they're crazy, taking those aspects out of Christianity, right? Took them out of Western humanity for a while, until, it's only like now in the past 30 years, or really since the 80s maybe, that it's been more accepted to talk about things like reincarnation. And so to me, the fact that there were people in the first 1,000 years after Jesus was born who believed in reincarnation and in the equality of divine feminine masculine, it still kind of blows me away. I'm very fascinated by them. And so anyway, Perdita, as a young 20-year-old, without knowing about any of this, had a very physical, visceral reaction to being in the location where the Cathars were massacred. And it was basically one of the first main genocides of Western Europe. That kind of began, it was the beginning of the witch hunts. So another thing that I find interesting is that the especially in like feminist women's circles, we talk about the witch hunts and how it was like against femininity, but it was really like a war against an ideology. It was an ideological war, and it started with eliminating men and women, all people who were thinking differently than the church and who were gaining traction in the people. And eventually, they also ended up coming after the women later, but it started off, not necessarily against women, but just against different ideologies. And of course, as someone who practices past life regression, I find it fascinating that she had a visceral reaction like this. And I love that she shares her story about this, because I know I've had experiences like this, and so have other people. And so just getting these stories out is really important. There's some quotes here that I want to share that I think are really beautiful. She talks about how there's like more than enough time for mercy and to get it right. So even if we think we make mistakes or we've done something wrong, with the thought of reincarnation, the idea of reincarnation being true, we will have a chance to come back and fix it if we want to. Now, one thing that she doesn't mention in the book, which kind of frustrates me, is like, what's the point of reincarnation? She kind of talks about it being like an eternal thing, that we're always coming back to Earth, and we've always been on Earth, and it's just like thousands and thousands of lifetimes, hundreds of lifetimes that just follow each other. And I'm not sure what they would say in Buddhism, but I, from my belief of working in past life regression and studying the works of Dolores Cannon, and also coming from the philosophy of yoga, is that we go through these reincarnations so that we can grow and evolve, and eventually we don't need to come back to Earth. I've also read some interesting books like channelings. One of my favorites is called Anna, Grandmother of Jesus, and by Claire Hartsong. And it's the story of the grandmother of Jesus. And it is a channeling, so you take that with a grain of salt. But there are things in there that that book opened my heart and mind to different possibilities. And she talks about like ascension of different souls. So this is kind of addressed in the Bible, I think, especially with the death of Mother Mary, and also the ascension of Jesus after his resurrection, is this idea that they become enlightened, and their physical body like alchemizes into into their spirit, and when they leave this plane, there's no physical remains that are left behind. So this is fascinating, because the whole kind of premise of this book is that the dead are everywhere. Everything is made of the dead, and so we can connect with the dead of all of these spirits that are in everything. And I don't really sit with that. I believe that like there is a difference between matter and spirit, and that when we die there is like a separation that happens, and it can be complete, like just because we're walking on soil in a forest doesn't mean that the spirits of everyone who's ever lived in that space is like around. Okay, I think it could be possible to connect, but I don't know. I would love to know what you guys think about that. I thought that this point was like stressed a little bit too much. The work of Daniel 4 is very interesting for connecting with ancestors, and also the different books on hypnotists' experiences with life between lives. They talk about how when someone dies, sometimes the soul goes to a healing place, or sometimes souls can go into other planets or other dimensional things. Or if they're a very elevated being, they will not reincarnate back into a body on Earth. If they choose to, they sometimes hang around to help, and sometimes they don't. They're like gone. They're beyond, out, right? I find that this book was kind of like stuck in the Earth dimension, and that there was like nowhere beyond to go or to incarnate back into. It was a bit closed in that sense. But there is always time to get things right. I do believe that. I do think that like self-forgiveness is really big, and that there's a lot more that can be worked out in this lifetime than we think. In one lifetime, especially, there's a few like seers or philosophers who say that at this time on Earth, it is such a dark time. In the theory of yoga, they talk about us being in Kali Yuga, which means that we can burn off a lot of karma like way faster than we could have 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, because it's such a dark time. One point that she brought up that I appreciated was this idea that old people can say, we're leaving soon, so like, what does it matter? There's nothing left for us to do. We're glad we're going to be gone soon. And I've even heard my grandparents talk like this, where they're like looking at the things that are happening in the world, the problems, the pollution, the ideologies, and they say, oh wow, we're glad we're going to be gone soon. And Perdita brings up the point that they're likely coming back. And so there's no like running away from your problems with death. And I would love to see our elders more involved with solving some of our issues. I think this idea of retirement that is quite modern has separated elders from reality a little bit, from children from the future. It's kind of like, okay, work really hard and then go and rest. And when you rest as an elderly person, you don't need to do anything. You just get to chill. You just chill. You know, you've got your money, you've got money coming in from your investments, and you get to just chill. And I think, of course, the elders need time for rest and to slow down. But I think that if we understood the ideas of reincarnation and some of these principles, they wouldn't be so quick to just check out and stop helping. She talks about, what would you do if you had another lifetime? What would you pray for? I highly recommend the first book that she wrote with her husband called The Way of the Rose. And in this book, they talk a lot about prayer and like our heart's desire. And I love that book. I think I preferred that book to this book. They have very different themes and feelings. But they talk about this idea of the heart's desire. And she brings it up again with this idea that whatever your heart's desire is in this lifetime, even if you don't get it, you're going to be coming back for it. And there's an incredible story about the lifetimes of her and her husband, lifetimes that they had together and separate. And there was one separate lifetime, and they were able to find poetry written by this man who was a mailman. And he was writing poetry where it sounded like he was looking for the love of his life, for his soulmate, that he didn't find in this lifetime, and that he found, likely in the next lifetime, where Perdita and Clark were actually together. They share a lot about their love story, which I think is very beautiful. It's very romantic. It's a little bit dramatic, in my opinion. Because again, coming back to this idea of yoga and merging with source or the divine, I think that putting too much emphasis on like our romantic relationship can kind of get in the way of that. I don't know. Maybe I'm jaded here a little bit, guys. I love my partner and I love the relationship that we have together. He's very like moksha based, and so am I. And I think it's bringing a lot to me in this lifetime. And I also do believe that there is a way towards enlightenment that is like through another person. So maybe that's what Perdita is getting at. Cynthia Bourgeau talks about this in her book on Mary Magdalene and Jesus in the most incredible, beautiful way, where it's like two become one, and that's their way to merge with source and divine, is by merging with the other in like a romantic love kind of way. But again, I feel like that's one route to enlightenment, and not every soul has to experience that as part of their incarnations in order to reach full enlightenment. But still, the love story and the connections that they made in the book are very, very incredible. I've deeply appreciated it. And I also do believe that what we pray for, we can get in this lifetime or in the next, that our prayers and our intentions are very strong. I try to be careful with that. And so I try to have the highest intention to be of service and of help to people on earth. And I have other parts to that are like more divine, and that I try to keep coming back to. And even though there's other things I might want in my life, I try to keep that intention as like the highest intention. And one note with intentions too, if you feel like that intention is not your highest intention, like that you want a dress and like actually that dress is like the thing you most want in this moment, and it doesn't matter if you reach enlightenment or help your children get to university, that dress is like the biggest thing of the moment. I'm taking something very superficial right now. You can intend for your intention to be your highest intention. Just a little tip. She talks about technology hiding magic, and hiding like this spiritual stuff. I'm not sure I believe 100% in that. I think that technology has been a huge part in spreading some of this new spiritual awareness, I guess, new agey, I'd say beyond new age, like more awareness, consciousness type of thinking and ideas. So I'm not sure technology hides the magic. I think it's in everything. She talks about how, again, we're sitting on the laps of the dead, like our lives are on the dead. I don't know. I found it was, again, too much importance on the dead and the ancestors, like all the time. I think that it's everything. It's part of a whole. Like the dead and the ancestors are one part of a whole. There's a whole chapter on a cat who like heals her mother from brain tumors, where the cat would like sit on her mother's head, and eventually the cat was found to have cancer and tumors, and the mother was able to live a few years longer. I think that's the story. Thanks to this cat who took the disease away, and the cat's name was Bodhi. And then a few years later, Perdita and her husband Clark were talking how Bodhi, which was short for Baudelaire, which is actually a French word, but they called him Bodhi, is related to Bodhisattva, and it's like this Buddhist saint who said he wanted to come back and reincarnate to help people. And they kind of left it at that. It was like a very open-ended kind of way of writing it. I think it seemed like she was insinuating that Bodhisattva reincarnated into the cat to help the mother. Again, I think that I would have liked to have more openness and more like different possibilities talked about this. I do believe that pets can definitely help heal us, and that they can take on our illnesses. When we adopted a cat, my partner and I, like 8 years ago, she was a rescue, and she ended up having terrible ear infections and like a tumor in the right side of her head, and also she was peeing blood. And at the time, I actually had really bad ear infections and also pain in my bladder. So that was like a pretty crazy thing, and she ended up dying of that tumor. That poor cat. And so, yeah, I wonder about that. I'm kind of afraid of getting a pet because I don't want them to take on our stuff. But I believe our children do that, and really anyone that we come into contact with, we're always like playing off each other in ways that we don't understand. And I also think that it doesn't have to necessarily be an elevated saintly soul in the animal for that to happen. I had one QHHT client, interestingly, who when she saw the death in the lifetime, she went to the other side, and I asked her if there was anyone there, and she said there were like her guardians, and she saw her dog spirit like right away. She just started bawling. It was this really big emotional connection to actually like meet the spirit of her dog, who had been such an important companion for her for many years in her life. And the dog's message was that, like, I'm always here. I'm actually your guardian angel, and I came down into the form of a dog to be with you and help you, actually on earth for some time. And I will be with you at the moment of your birth, because she was pregnant at the time. And she ended up in her birth actually seeing the same type of dog walking out the window in her neighborhood, which she like never sees that dog walking in her neighborhood. So that was a wild thing. And, in this case, they were saying like a guardian angel who came down. Who knows if it was a soul that had been incarnated into earth? Who knows? I just think that there's like so many more possibilities. And I find that this book was written about the dead and reincarnation in the framework of thinking of like Buddhism and like her personal experiences, without too much research or openness into other ideas, and even like modern ideas. What are the past life regressionists receiving in terms of information, especially regarding life between lives and souls and stuff. She talks about, they found like the date of the death of Clark's possible previous lifetime, and that it was like exactly 49 days and 9 months before his birth. So the idea is that in Buddhism, they say that a soul, it takes 49 days for a soul to reincarnate back in. I think that's very interesting, and that in his case, it was like exactly that amount of time. in the work with Dolores Cannon, I think it has been found that it's not really like a set thing. That could be maybe like a normal, regular thing. I'm currently reading the book Life in Between Lives by Dolores Cannon, and it's a conglomeration of many different people talking about their experiences in the space in between lives. And they talk about how some souls who need more healing will have more time, they'll go to different places, and also some souls get really excited and they want to just jump right back in, go right back to earth without doing the proper kind of analysis or like waiting period in between, and that can cause certain consequences. Yeah, there's also walk-ins, which is a pretty wild concept, but basically souls can like switch out in one lifetime. Sometimes this happens like especially after trauma, where the soul needs to go and heal, and a new soul will walk into that body that's already like an adult body, to continue on with the life and do the work. So that's a pretty wild thing to think about. Another thing that she mentioned was about monotheism being like a bad thing, that it has done away with a lot of like the polytheistic ways of thinking. And I find that I would love to see monotheism and polytheism not being talked about as two separate things, one being good or the other being bad, and like two camps. I think there's like an umbrella situation that can happen, where we have like this idea of oneness that expresses itself plurally, and that we can have diverse ways of expressing our devotion to this oneness, and like different facets of a diamond, different faces of God, goddess, source, so to say. And so I know that people are like very angry at the church and Christianity and Catholicism for doing away with the polytheistic pagan ideas, but I don't think we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. She talks about nature being an oracle, and that we can like see messages, and that the dead are always speaking to us through nature. Again, I don't like this coming back to like the dead again all the time. I feel that there could be angelic beings, beings that have never been on earth. There can be extraterrestrial beings who are trying to send us messages through nature, through different symbols, and there could be like source itself that is also trying to send us messages. There can be nature spirits trying to connect to us, and all of these beings aren't necessarily beings who have been alive in a physical body and then dead, right? So they're not like the dead. They're more the unseen beings. There was one quote that was really kind of well written, talked about the alternative to existential isolation of atheism, where she was talking about being able to pray to the dead, or to Mary, or to, anyone that we want to pray to, and that everything is alive, and that, again, for her, the dead are in everything. I would say God is in everything. And that it provides an alternative to the existential isolation of atheism, and that we can, her point, I think in the time too, is that we can always be asking for help all the time, anywhere, to the dead, who are always listening and always willing to help. What's interesting in the conversations with my husband and I is I actually love prayer. I love praying to God, to Mother Mary, to Anna, to my ancestors. I do use those forms of prayer. And my husband himself is not really a guy for prayer. He's not one to want to ask help from God. I think he's done it maybe like a handful of times in his life. Like he can count on one finger the times that he really sat down and prayed to someone elsewhere for help. So for him, he's someone who like believes that it's a possible thing, that there are unseen beings, God himself, Jesus, who can definitely be helping us. And he believes that we need to take responsibility for our lives, and that we have a lot more power than we think, and we don't need to be like reaching out and asking for help all the time. There's even a funny story where I was experiencing a past life regression, and a lifetime where we were together as Native Americans. And he died pretty young as a like Mohawk warrior fighting against the French. And this woman that I was, I guess, allowed herself to get really bitter and to get her heart kind of got cold and stone cold over his death and the fact that she was alone. And when she died, my practitioner asked, is there anyone there on the other side? And there was him, this man, the husband. And then she asked, like, oh, really, was he there with you? Was he watching over you the whole time? And she said no, or I could see him, this, like, I don't know, maybe I didn't see him, but I felt the energy of, like, laughing, like, no, I wasn't there, I wasn't with you, had other things to do, I died and my spirit was, like, off in the cosmos and I was busy, and I knew you would be okay, like, you were a strong woman, a strong soul, you had all the teachings of the medicine of your people, and why did you let yourself get cold? Why did you let yourself get cold towards the people and get kind of bitter and angry at God? Like, you knew that we were going to be together again. You knew you would find me at the moment of your death. You knew we would have a lifetime together again, because all these things, come back and we get our wishes and our heart's desire. And so this kind of goes back to the point that we can always be praying and asking for help. In my prayers to the ancestors, I like to say, like, to the well ancestors who are available and who want to help. And then I'll ask my question. So I think not all the spirits are around and wanting and willing to help all the time. I think there has to be, like, a certain respect for them. They're not just all-powerful magical beings who are at our beck and call. And I think that taking back on some of that responsibility and not, like, just giving it out to these people all the time, asking for help all the time, is healthy for us. She also goes on to say, like, may we all be born again with our family and our children and our lover and our husband. Again, I found this a little bit closed in a sense, or I don't know. I don't think, what if it's not in our best interest to be coming back with our children and our lover and our husbands and our parents again? I think, I didn't really like this prayer, because it kind of comes back to that thing of, like, you belong to me, and, like, we just want to keep this fun time going, and if we have a good lifetime, then we just want to, like, repeat it and do it over again. There could be a time where two souls are complete with their experience together, and move on and never come back again. We might have lived that in our lifetime with a certain lover. We could have an amazing experience, and then we're complete, and you're done. So I found this was, like, a strong sense of attachment to family, children, and a romantic partner. And that's it. That is my review of the book. Those are some of my thoughts. If you have anything that you want to add or share, please mention them in the comments below, or if you're listening to this on the podcast form, send me a message. I'd love to hear what you think about some of these topics that I find really interesting and that I'm passionate about. So I wish you the most beautiful day. I wish you to find your magic, to not hesitate to make the prayers, to connect to your heart's prayer, and go for it in the biggest way in your life. Goodbye.